So let's take a look at another Matric poem, this time Motho ke Motho ka Batho Babang by Jeremy Kronin. It's important to understand the context of this poem. The poem describes the experiences of a political prisoner during apartheid in South Africa. So it's important to know that the poet Jeremy Kronin was in fact arrested and sentenced to 7 years in prison for being part of the South African Communist Party and for fighting against apartheid. Please give this video a like and hit subscribe. So first, let's take a look at the title. The title is in Sotho, one of South Africa's official languages. It says Motho ke Motho ka Batho Babang, which basically means a person is a person because of other people. So we see that the title of this poem highlights the African philosophy of Ubuntu, which places emphasis on being a person through other people. So no one is in isolation, no one can exist by themselves. Ultimately, an individual exists because of their community. So it starts off by saying, by holding my mirror out of the window I see. From line 1, we see that the poem is written in the present tense and in the first person. This helps to involve the reader more because it's as though we are witnessing this and being spoken to directly. With the pronouns my and I, we see that the speaker is a prisoner who is held in solitary confinement. The prisoner is stuck in a cell, and in order to see his surroundings, he has to use a mirror. That's how isolated he is. So we see that the mirror is a symbol of freedom and communication. It's the only link that the prisoner has to the outside world. So using the mirror, he can see down to the end of the passage, and he notices another person, and we see that the words down there indicate that the only person he can communicate with is a very long distance away. So we know from the poet's history and the context of this poem that it was during apartheid. Political prisoners were isolated in order to dehumanize them. They prevented human connection, they prevented people from building relationships, and this also made sure that no one received any news from the outside and got any encouragement about the struggle. So the person that our speaker sees is also a prisoner, and we note here that the speaker doesn't give them a name. So this tells us that he does not know him personally, but because they are both prisoners during this time, they have shared beliefs, values, and their opposition to apartheid makes them comrades. So the prisoner down the hallway is polishing a door handle. We see that prisoners were often given these boring and pointless tasks so that they had no sense of accomplishment. We see a repetition of the phrase in the mirror because this highlights the fact that this is their only means of communication. So from the first 6 lines, we know that the speaker is able to see another prisoner and that they are able to communicate. But how do they communicate considering their distance? Line 7 tells us, I see the fingertips of his free hand. So firstly, we see alliteration with a repetition of the F sound. This highlights the freedom of his free hand, and it's quite ironic that the prisoner's hand is described as free because this emphasizes the fact that he is not free. The prisoner down the passage uses his hand to make an object the size of a badge and holds it to his head. The first signal mimics the badge on a prison warder's cap. Line 12 tells us the meaning of this. We see the brackets provide a translation to the hand signals, and it's very important to see how the visual layout separates the description of what is happening from the translation of what the hand signals mean. In line 13, we see that the prisoner uses 2 fingers extended in a V and he wiggles them like 2 antennae. So we see a simile here where the 2 fingers are compared to antenna. Insects have antenna and they are used to sense danger. So this hand signal illustrates that danger is close. In line 15, we see the translation for this hand signal is that he is being watched. Thus far, we see a very secretive and intimate tone where they are communicating, but no one must know. They don't want to be caught communicating. In line 16, once again, we see alliteration. And the next hand signal is a watcher's hand's arc on the wrist of his polishing arm without disrupting the slow rhythm of his work. The repetition of the word slow helps to slow the pace of this line. It also shows his deliberate movements. He knows that he must still look as though he is working so that the warder does not become suspicious. Right, line 19 once again shows a translation saying that maybe later they will try to speak. And we also notice irony in this line because they cannot literally speak. They can only communicate using hand signals. Okay, line 21st, we notice it is written in italics, and the poet makes use of italics to show direct speech. And we see these are the words of the warder. It says, "Hey, wat maak jy daar?" So once again, the poet uses the visual layout to show that the warder's words are located in the middle of the page. So he's not part of the same conversation as the two prisoners. And the reason that the poet uses Afrikaans here, Afrikaans reflects the language of oppression in South Africa during apartheid to help establish dominance. Line 21 tells us that the warder's voice comes from around the corner. He cannot see the prisoner in isolation who's holding out the mirror in order to try and communicate. In line 22, once again, the italics show us direct speech. The prisoner polishing the door handle says, "No, just polishing, boss." The word boss is an Afrikaans word meaning boss, and we see that black people were forced to address white people with this term during apartheid. Our speaker continues to describe the scene. He says, "He turns back to me. Now watch his free hand, the talkative one." The prisoner's hand is described as talkative. This is an example of personification because the hand is given the ability to speak, and it illustrates to us that this is the prisoner's means of communication. So it slips quietly behind, and in line 26, "Strength, brother," it says. So this is the first time in the poem that we get the meaning of the hand signal before the hand signal itself is described. So we see that he's offering a message of strength, and we see how the prisoners are empowered by creating bonds with other comrades, and how the struggle against apartheid unites all those who oppose it. In line 27 and 28, we see, "In my mirror, a black fist." So now we know what this last hand signal was, and it is a symbol of the resistance against apartheid, a black fist. And just through this simple hand signal, the speaker gains strength, he gains comfort, he gains encouragement, and it is essentially Ubuntu in action. We know that the prisoner polishing the handle is black because his fist is described as black, but the speaker, Jeremy Kronin, is in fact white. Despite their different races, they are both comrades in the struggle against apartheid. So ultimately, the symbol of a fist shows that closeness and communication between people doesn't have to be complicated. The style and diction of this poem is very important. The poem is written in an informal style. There's a lot of use of colloquial language, and this helps to involve the reader because it creates a conversational tone. There's no regular rhyme scheme, rhythm, or structure, and it is a narrative poem. It tells the story of the speaker's own experiences in prison. We see that Kronin uses different languages to make the poem more realistic and historically accurate. We see that he makes use of direct speech to help keep you in the moment and experience it as though you were standing there watching. Themes that are present in this poem are resistance, because we see how they overcome oppression. We see how the prisoners' bodies may be held captive, but their spirits are still free. We see a theme of communication. Communication doesn't have to be complicated, and ultimately also a theme of Ubuntu, of providing a sense of comfort and strength for one another. If you found this video helpful, please check out my other videos. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share.